Pittsburgh Steeler fans, welcome back to another episode of the Hangover. I'm Daniel. Don't adjust your sets. I was here yesterday as well. I'm here back to back. Alongside with me is Shannon White. Shannon, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I noticed last night I was looking there at the Q&A and I seen my buddy Jeremy and I said, "Well, there's Daniel." And he was a guest hosting there last night with Jeremy and did a great job. So I tell you, I was pleasantly surprised to see it.
Awesome. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. It was a fun time. If you guys haven't checked that out after the show, make sure
Mm-hmm.
go back and watch last night's episode of the Q&A on Still Current Network and get you'll see a familiar face, so to speak. And so I want to say thank you to everybody that's in the live chat, everybody that's watching even on the replay. If you guys haven't hit that like and subscribe button, what are you waiting for? Let's get that up. Let's get that going. Uh, but first, before we start, we had probably one of the biggest contracts signed over this past weekend.
Yes.
Yeah. Kenny Pickett signed a contract for the rest of his life, hopefully, God willing. He is now he's no longer a single man, y'all. He married his fiance over the weekend. Congratulations, Kenny. What are your thoughts on his life-changing contract, so to speak?
Oh, I think it's great. You know, when you have that stability, he's in such a leadership position. And we've seen that a lot of young athletes, single young athletes, famous, on the town, bad things can happen. I like this much better that he is starting his family and he is grounded. He seems very mature because, of course, he is 24 or 25 now. So I expect him to be more mature. But it's such a contrast to young Ben. So I'm very happy for him. Couldn't be happier. They seem so happy. Somebody said it was a fairy tale like wedding, and it appeared to be. I know they had the smoke machines out when they were dancing, and she looked like she was just a princess gliding around. So he done really well for himself, and they make a beautiful couple. So I'm really happy for him. Some of the Steelers were there. I didn't actually see Ellen Robertson in any of the pictures, but I did hear that he caught the bouquet when she threw it.
That's
And
crazy.
he said he's not letting anything hit the ground. A lot of the bridesmaids and other women were really pissed off that he caught it. But hey, Ellen Robertson, man, he's committed.
He's committed. That's what you want. That's what you need. That type of commitment,
Yep.
not just from your quarterback, but also from your receivers. If you're going to, want to, hoist the Lombardi at the end of the year. And so, all jokes aside, today we're talking. There's a lot of time between now and the start of training camp in Latrobe. So today we want to start a series, kind of ranking position groups of greatest Steelers of all time. And today we're going to start off with the running backs. Next week we're going to be talking about quarterbacks, which will probably be a Big Ben versus Terry Bradshaw discussion. So you don't want to miss that next week. But today we're going to be talking about the running back position. I know that you have watched the Pittsburgh Steelers in a different era than from where I've grown up and watched them. I mean, obviously you've also watched my era as well. But given the fact that you have seen some of the older guys play, your list of greatest Steelers of all time based on who you've seen is probably quite a bit different than what mine is. And, starting off with the running back position, we'll start off with the biggest question that's out there is who is your favorite running back of all time, to wear the black and gold?
I've been thinking about this concept and this discussion topic for a while. It started out, people, every time we talk about greatest ever Steelers, we have to take era and rule changes and surrounding talent, all these different things into consideration. And it's always a hot button topic. And people in my discussion threads on my articles are very passionate about who their favorite is and why. And so obviously the biggest one or the most passionate one I've ever been involved in is when it comes down to Terry Bradshaw and Ben Roethlisberger. So I first thought about just doing that. the quarterback position. And then I'm like, well, I want our very knowledgeable viewing audience to be involved. And so I said, let's build up because we got like 4 weeks, guys. So let's build up and have that last position be Terry Bradshaw and Ben Roethlisberger. And we'll start out with some other positions. See, some positions, like if you say defensive lineman, it's me, Joe Green. It's hands down. There's no discussion. There is other positions, though, that are very worth discussion. Running back being one of them. Center. Steelers have had some incredible Hall of Fame centers, and it's hard to decide, which one. Cornerback. So we're going to have a lot of fun here the next few weeks, good Lord willing, going over this. But running back I thought was a really good one to start with. For me, my all-time favorite Pittsburgh Steelers running back. And now this is not who I'm saying is the best ever.
Right.
Who was my favorite to watch was Jerome Bettis. The bus. I mean, it's funny. A lot of these Steelers running backs during the height of they were actually arguably more important than quarterback at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Because Bettis only played with Ben for a short period of time.
Right.
But there was a period of time there where their number one offensive weapon was Jerome Bettis. Because he wasn't surrounded with the Hall of Famers that, let's say, Franco was.
Right.
So that's why I would say I just loved how he played. I loved his enthusiasm. And so my all-time favorite Steelers running back would have to be Jerome Bettis.
You see, for me, Jerome Bettis was pretty high on that list. Number 2 for me. Now, Franco Harris would probably be high on my list if I ever had the opportunity to watch him, but I never did. So for me, Jerome Bettis came in number 2 for me. And one of the reasons why he was so high on my list was, he was a bigger back that had quick feet and was able to do some amazing things out of that running back position at his size. And around that time was around the time that I was getting interested in football. It's around the time that I was getting into middle school ball and peewee football and things like that. And I was a bigger kid too. And I was like, man, if I want to be like Jerome Bettis, I want to be a big guy, be able to take on the hits and stuff like that. I ended up on the line. So I was a little too big and not so quick on the feet, I guess. But it ended up being what it was. But he was one of my favorites. But for me, my favorite, and it's just solely based on what he did on the field. I understand what he did. When to exit his career, to leave the Pittsburgh Steelers, probably wasn't on the best terms. But to me, on the field, would probably be Le'Veon Bell. I thought that he brought a different aspect to his game. He was a unicorn when it came to the running back position during the time that he was playing. A lot of, you weren't seeing a lot of patience running backs, running backs with patience. You weren't seeing running backs that could be, a second receiver at that time. You had some guys like LaDainian Tomlinson who was able to catch the ball outside of the, from the backfield, but he wasn't running, extensive routes deep down the field either, like the Le'Veon Bell. So he, to me, based on, the splash factor and his versatility is what made him my favorite running back. I just wish things would have changed, and obviously himself as well. There's a lot of interviews that he's done where he's kind of spoke about the regret of how things ended in Pittsburgh. But during his time here, I think that he, and it goes into my next question is when it comes to your favorite running back, what about their game made it, your favorite? And for me, when it comes to Le'Veon Bell, it was just that different dynamic that, other teams were forced to have to stop and address Le'Veon Bell. And, if it wasn't for a couple of unfortunate injury type of situations, I very much well think that he would have been a huge component to the Steelers hoisting a Lombardi or two had he himself just stayed healthy on a couple of those seasons where down the line he went down. But, I thought his patience and his ability to catch the ball was one of the reasons why I loved his game. For Jerome Bettis, what made him your favorite player or running back?
Jerome was, you knew that when you needed 4 yards, he would get you 5. He was just such a dependable power guy. He was so nimble. When, in his prime. Now, of course, a lot of people remember him towards the end when he won the Super Bowl with Ben, but then he was having to take injections every week just to play, and he wasn't nimble so much anymore. But, for a man who was 250, 60 pounds, he was so nimble and laid on his feet in the hole, and he would find a hole or he would make one. He was a combination. I believe anybody remembers Earl Campbell. Earl Campbell was like maybe the greatest power back of all time. He would just run over people, run through people. He was so powerful. And Bettis had that when he needed it in his tank. I've seen him run over guys. We all remember when he ran over Brian Urlacher.
Mm-hmm.
But he also had them nimble feet where he would set you up, make you think he's going to run you over. A guy would, settle, ready, brace for impact, and then he'd take off. And so he was a very unique combination of talent to have that power and that mass and then that light on his feet. So he played with joy. I mean, so many times we watch guys now, Daniel, and you don't see the joy in their game. I like to see passion. I like to see them get fired up, get mad. I also like to see him have fun. I love to see Jerome would play with a big smile on his face. When you had him and Hines Ward on the same team, you couldn't help but smile. We don't see enough of that anymore. Now guys get a first down and they get up and they want to pose and they want to, and all this. And hey, there's a place for that. But I like to see that joy. And Bettis exuded joy. And that's where a lot of his nickname came from, the bus. And everybody loved it, whether you was a little kid or you was an older grown-up in the stands. You loved the wheels on the bus go round and around, and it was just a great nickname. So I just have a lot of fond memories of Bettis.
Yeah, I do too. I thought, one of my favorite memories when it comes to Jerome Bettis, and I think this is a lot of people's, is when he knocked down Urlacher, and that that Super Bowl, to start that Super Bowl run. But that was so late in his career. He had so many other things. One of my other favorite moments or games from him is the revenge game against the Rams. The first one that he had, he just ran all over him. So he was definitely, like I said, my number 2 when it came to my all-time favorite running backs. And so Jerome Bettis primarily played, late 90s, mid 90s to late 90s, early 2000s. Le'Veon Bell played 2010s up until probably, he could still play now. So I guess you can say current he's probably more considered a current running back. Do you think that these running backs could switch and play in each other's era? Meaning, do you think that perhaps if Jerome Bettis in his prime, suited up for like a Kyle Shanahan offense, would he fit in? What are your thoughts on that aspect?
Running back is one of the positions. Some positions era makes a bigger difference. But running back, if you're a natural, instinctive runner, you can play in most eras. As long as you're tough enough. The rules have changed, but not so much for running backs. So a guy like Bettis, if he would have been in the 70s during the Steel Curtain, he would have just been another power back, because that's what, most teams had back in the 70s. And he would have been in there just, the hard-nosed football. If you played Bettis now, you say, well, Bettis, he wasn't a great receiver. And a lot of running backs now, see, Bell was the modern profile or prototype in that he could do it all. He could run, he could block, and he could catch. Almost like a slot receiver, which is part of what happened when he wanted more money. But anyway, Bell was that modern prototype. But Bettis, it would be like a Derrick Henry or one of those guys right now, in that even the defenses are set up now to stop the pass.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be you stop the run first. That was always your first. Any team that could run the ball and you would crush you. So all defenses were set up to stop the run, and then you worried about the pass. Now it's kind of the opposite. So a guy like Bettis, even though he wasn't a great receiver, he would be able to still be a very dominant player, because he would just run over these smaller defenses. A lot of these guys are smaller now than they were in the 90s and early 2000s. They're just smaller linebackers. made for coverage more than run defense. So I think both guys. Bell was so shifty, so patient, and so well rounded. He could have played in the earlier area as well. You had more cheap shots though, like the shots that Burfett did to Bell to hurt him, and
Right.
as you said, it cost the Steelers maybe some playoff runs with Bell. That stuff was way more common back in the days of the Oakland Raiders and the Cowboys of the 70s and early 80s.
True, but the seasons were shorter, so less hits in that aspect. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I've seen some of these highlights from back in the day, and even in the early '90s, jacked up and things like that were promoted. It was
Yeah, it was highlight reels. Yes,
exactly. It wasn't like it is today, where you know concussions and awareness of those type of things medically are more prevalent, and so yeah, definitely 100%. And I think Bell, to answer the same question, would definitely be able to fit in almost every era. I think you're absolutely right in that aspect. But Bell, especially because of his size, he was what 6'1", 6'2", somewhere around there, 240 at one point in his career. So he was a bigger back, and he could end up taking those type of hits. And and he found a way of not being, not taking some of those bigger hits unless it was later down in the season, and it was against, as you mentioned, Burfict and the Bengals. And so I can see. Yeah, 100%. I can see Bell being able to play in multiple eras. When it comes to Jerome, I think that the passing aspect of today's game is highly important, especially when it comes to the running back position. And not saying that Jerome couldn't do it. I just don't see him being utilized in today's era of football or having as much success in today's football, just mainly on the opportunities as well. Back when he played, he was a more of a cowbell type of running game, which the Steelers aren't afraid of doing now. Najee Harris in his rookie season was that cowbell running back. Le'Veon Bell was that cowbell running back. So it's not like, Jerome Bettis wouldn't fit into any offense. I'm fairly positive he would fit into, today's Pittsburgh Steelers offense. But, across the board, NFL current offenses have the running back utilized as a receiver. And I think that would probably be the biggest question mark for me when it comes to Jerome Bettis being able to play today in today's era. You don't see very many backs his size. I mean, the Derrick Henry, the Najee Harris, they're probably the most closely sized backs that you can think of. But even those guys are, more. There's a difference between when you look at Najee, he looks like a Superman, and Jerome Bettis was a little bit on the heavier side. And so
one of the things we got to remember is one of the reasons why Bettis is in the Hall of Fame is because there's nobody like Bettis.
That's true. That's
100%. And the modern defenses were not be ready to handle him. As I mentioned, his power and those nimble feet. And like I said, if he gets past your defensive line, your guys nowadays are going to have trouble bringing him down.
100%.
So there's nobody you can really compare him to now because there's really hardly been anybody ever in history that had his physical makeup and ability. So that's why I think he would still be effective. He wouldn't have to be a receiver like Henry isn't. Harris really is a much better receiver than Bettis. But neither one of them guys are as light on their feet or have that power package that Bettis had.
That's true. There was one incident where Jerome Bettis outran, was it Lynch? He just took off from him.
Yeah, in Tampa,
Yeah, in Tampa. And, he was surprisingly quick for his size. And you're absolutely right. He was a unicorn, and that's one of the reasons why he is a Hall of Fame running back. Do you think that if, Bell didn't leave in the manner that he did, that he would have been considered, if he would have stayed a little bit longer and perhaps maybe his career continued in the same trajectory that it was going on? Do you think he would have been possibly considered to be a gold jacket type of guy?
I think that was his shot. He had at that point 5,000 and some yards rushing alone, and then he would have went total yards. He would have been up there with a LaDainian Tomlinson, somebody of that nature, who was a dual threat running back. because Bell was the best running back at one point in the NFL, and he was in the Killer Bee situation. They with Ben and AB, nobody could really stack to stop him. If they did, they were really risking getting torched with the passing game. So he just and I think a lot of the running backs are doing that right now because we're seeing there's some, talk about, well, we're not getting paid enough and all that stuff. And I'm afraid that we're going to see more of that, and maybe even Harris in a year or two. Yeah. But if he would have stayed, he was in the perfect system. They would have continued to use him. Now they would have drove him in the ground, but if he could have got 4 more years in at the production that he was having and all pro seasons like he was having, then he would have been in consideration for Hall of Fame, consideration. Right. But when he left, went to, for more money, went to not really more money, as we know, but he went to a very bad team, and then that was the end of it. So, yeah, he did that to himself. Didn't listen to Mama. We know we should always listen to Mama, and I think he did cost himself a shot at being a Hall of Famer.
I do too, and I think that when you look at Bell and you look at Bettis, the way they exited the Pittsburgh Steelers, completely different, opposite ends of the spectrum. Whereas Bell, like you mentioned, wanted the money, and Bettis, stuck around and was able to retire a Super Bowl winning champion, especially that exclamation point to his career, so to speak. And I do agree with you. I think that if Bell would have stayed and continued the trajectory that he was going in, and already had the support of the city and the fans, I think that he would have been a very much well in consideration for the for a gold jacket at the end of his, 5 years after the end of his career. One last question before we go into the break, but how did Jerome Bettis compare to the other running backs of his era? Do you think he was ever the top guy in that list, or where did he fall in line for you?
I don't know if I would say he was the top guy on the list, just from the fact that there was other really good running backs during that time who were more well-rounded as far as receivers. A lot of times it's fit. Jerry Rice was the perfect West Coast style wide receiver. Pairing him with Bill Walsh and Joe Montana and then Steve Young, and it was the perfect pairing because he could catch slants and he could catch stuff like that, and then he could, because he was such a physical receiver. Bettis was a perfect match for Pittsburgh. He was the offense, the culture, the town, everything. So, but now, again, when we started out, we're talking about who is the best running back.
Right.
And to me, the best Steelers running back of all time has got to be Franco Harris.
Got you.
The reason why is he played the most games, most carries, most yards, most touchdowns, 4 Super Bowls, and he was the offensive focal point on those Super Bowl teams.
Mm-hmm.
MVP of the Super Bowl. He had his best games. Now, this is something that's hard for people to imagine now. But Franco Harris had his best games in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
He was a guy that rose to the occasion. It was so sad when he died last year, and before they was able to honor him on that against the Raiders that night.
Right.
Because I think a lot of those people didn't realize he was a great human being, a humanitarian. But Franco, just like on defense, me and Joe Green come in and he reset and the standards, and he was the foundation for that defense and that Steelers dynasty. Franco Harris was that answer on offense. It wasn't Terry Bradshaw. Bradshaw was very bad for many years. And he was always in a quarterback controversy with somebody. And then he finally, even at 74, he didn't have a great year, but they won the Super Bowl because of the defense and Franco Harris. Franco Harris gave the Steelers an identity.
Mm-hmm.
He represented something in the city of Pittsburgh. Franco's Army, he united different cultures in the city. Franco was more than just a ball player. Mm-hmm. And he was kind of, whereas Me Joe did not like to talk to the media a lot, and he was not the face of the franchise. He was the best player. He was the foundation, but he wasn't the vocal voice of the franchise. And it definitely wasn't Bradshaw or anybody else. It was Franco Harris.
Right.
If something needed to be said to the media, Franco Harris said it. If somebody needed to stand up on offense, and say, hey, put it on my back. I'm going to carry this team to this playoff win, this Super Bowl win. It was Franco Harris. That first Super Bowl against the Minnesota Vikings, Minnesota was a heck of a defense. And nobody done that to them that year, like Franco ran over them in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Now we know it's offensive line, it's everything. The Steelers, it was a great performance, but they rode him. He was their champion, and they rode him to the title. So, and Franco was just, he meant so much to all that Steel Curtain dynasty, and it allowed Bradshaw to grow into what he became, and it allowed Swan and Stallworth. And I just think that it's easy to forget how great Franco Harris actually was, because greatness gets taken for granted over time. Right. Memories run dim, and I would challenge people, if they really want to know, just go back and watch some of it and see a man who, the way he ran the ball was very unique. He was legit 6'3". He ran pretty upright, and he just floated. It's hard to compare him. Just like Jerome, Franco floated around the field. He was a different type of runner than anybody in the game since him. And I just think that for all those reasons, and one of the greatest winners at the position of all time, and the focal point of the Steelers offense, I would say that Franco Harris is the greatest Steelers running back, without question.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a reason why his number is the third number to get retired in Steelers franchise history. Do you think, Franco Harris could play in today's NFL?
Yeah, Franco was actually a very good receiver. He had a really good, soft set of hands. Now, I understand, back in the 70s, you didn't throw to your receivers much. I mean, to your running backs very much.
Right.
It was funny. The offense a lot back in that era was Franco Harris right, Franco Harris left, Franco Harris up the middle. And then, hey, we're going to throw him a change up here, play action. Swan, you go deep. Stallworth, you go deep. And you run whoever the Grossman, Benny Cunningham, whoever the tight end, you run around in the middle of the field, and I might throw it to you if one of the other guys ain't open. It was a different era. Yes, Terry Bradshaw called his own plays, but the playbook was so much more simplified. There wasn't 12 different defenses and packages like we have now, sub packages and big nickel, little nickel, heavy. It just, back then teams had started the game in their base defense, and they ended the game in their base defense. They just was totally different.
Right.
And so, but could Franco play now? Yeah. I would have loved to see Franco play in this era. Again, he was a large running back. We was talking about Bill earlier. Franco was a large man.
Yeah.
And the way he ran, and if you've seen him in them Super Bowls, man, when he wanted to get that or needed that yard, he put his head down and run over anybody. That was just who he was. And but with them soft hands and setting him up with screens and stuff, yeah, I think he'd be very effective. And he'd probably be in a lot better shape because of the modern dietary training regimens, chiropractic. They've just got all these advantages now, and that's why we're seeing what we see in these bigger, stronger, faster athletes.
100%. And if anybody ever wants to question Franco's ability to catch, he has probably the greatest reception in NFL history. So take that to the
Exactly.
bank.
Yes.
So we're going to take a quick break right now. We're going to take a few words of our sponsors on the audio side. On the YouTube side, don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a few seconds. And welcome back to the Hangover. Today we're talking about the running back position. I'm Daniel J. Alongside with me is Shannon White. Shannon, before we get back into the discussion, do you have anything coming up? Any articles brewing? Perhaps I think you're coming out on the curtain call tomorrow. Is that correct? Or on Wednesday? I'm sorry, not tomorrow.
Yes, the curtain call. Now we're still discussing, what we're going to be topic of discussion for the curtain call. But no, I've thought about. I was going to write this as an article, and then, but it really hit me this morning, and I didn't really have time because I'm going to try to write a introductory article before the show each week. About the next week's topic. So no, I've not started another article at the moment.
Got you. Well, stay tuned, y'all. Make sure you still check out BehindTheSteelCurtain.com for those articles. They're still available there. And also make sure you check out all the other audio podcasts on the audio side and on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe, ring that notification bell. That way you're notified of all of our daily lives that we go out. So back to the running back conversation. When it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think this is a good question or good discussion to get into, who is, in your opinion, the most underrated running back to wear the black and gold?
When I think underrated running backs in Pittsburgh, the name that immediately comes to mind is Frank Pollard, because Frank Pollard played in a down era for the Steelers. We remember the Steel Curtain. We remember the 90s in Blitzburg, but the 80s was just, there was some quality players in the 80s. And I think Jeff wrote an article about guys that were really good players that people don't think about because they didn't win championships. Well, Frank Pollard was just a solid, dependable running back. He didn't miss games. He was durable. He always get you about 4.5 yards a carry. You could catch a little bit. Again, even in the 80s, they didn't throw to the running back a lot. But, yeah, to me, the name that immediately comes to mind is underrated is Frank Pollard.
Nice. So, for me, and Frank, I'm not familiar. When was he playing again?
Frank Pollard was in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. So that was before my time.
Yes.
Well before my time. So, I don't recall who he is, but I'm sure he was a fantastic player, as you mentioned, underrated, basically because of the team that he played around. For me, the most underrated running back, you hear a lot of, positive things about, Le'Veon Bell, Franco Harris, Jerome Bettis, all these names, but, nobody really applies that to like Fast Willie Parker. I think he is one of the most underrated running backs. He had a huge role and a huge reason as to why the Pittsburgh Steelers were making those Super Bowl runs. In fact, in that Super Bowl in 2005, he had I think it's still current, but at the time, he broke the record for the longest, touchdown run by a running back. And I think that he is probably one of the most underrated running backs that are out there. He had 3 consecutive years during that time rushing over 1,000 yards. Speed. He had the home run ability.
Oh, yeah.
He just didn't have he was an undrafted rookie. He didn't have the pedigree. He didn't have the draft aspect to his name. He wasn't a first, second, third round pick, things like that. So he wasn't, I guess, the sexy player, so to speak. But, man, did he get things done, and was he exciting to watch, in my opinion. I remember his first game, I think it was against Tennessee. I could be wrong. And he broke a long one there. And I remember there was an interview with Coach Cower at a certain point where he had to continue to remind Willie Parker to breathe during his runs because he wouldn't breathe. He would just start running, and he's like, yeah, Coach had to tell me to breathe. He's, to me, is one of my favorite underrated running backs. What did you think about Willie Parker in his game when he played?
Well, Willie Parker was one of the best values in Steeler history. We look at Jaylen Warren, undrafted free agent. And just when you find those guys, it just gives you so much freedom when you're constructing a roster, because you basically got this guy, the free agent part. They were undrafted. You didn't have to give up any draft capital.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's how it was with Willie Parker. And Willie come in, and it was just the perfect complement to Jerome Bettis. You had the power, and then you had the speed with Willie. And it really, when Bettis would play more snaps, it made Willie even more effective. Because, you're going from trying to tackle Jerome Bettis to trying to tackle Fast Willie, and Willie just outrun you. He get around that corner so easy on teams. And I really love to watch him. If he would have just been able to be a little more durable, he would be higher up on the list. That brings me to another guy that I was going to mention as the biggest, basically one-hit wonder ever for the Steelers was Barry Foster.
Yeah.
He had a very short window there, but my goodness, 92 to 94, he was a blessing. He was so much fun to watch. Barry Foster always said it was like a bowling ball with legs. He just rolled wherever, and he was such a low center of gravity, and he got built up so much speed that he just run through arm tackles. And I wish that things would have worked out different with him as well, just like with Fast Willie, because Barry Foster was a tremendous player, and that one year he was the offense for the Steelers, and so I definitely wanted to mention him because of his legacy. I think his best season was 1,690 yards or something like that, off the top of my head. I mean, that's. This was back during the 16-game season, not, 17. We always got to keep that in mind. Franco did a lot of his damage 14-game season. So,
yeah, 100%. In fact, I mean, I was a huge Barry Foster fan when he was out.
Yeah.
In fact, my dad has home videos of me pretending to be Barry Foster. So,
I have a jersey. I got
there
a jersey.
Is.
Yeah.
Was it 29? Was that correct?
29. Yeah.
29. Yeah, there's some memories there. Barry Foster. So, going through all the Steelers running backs, who's been your favorite backup running back or second punch? Your Jalen Warren, so to speak.
Man, you put me on the spot because I love Rocky Bleier. I love everything about Rocky Bleier because that is one of the first times the NFL universe got to see who the Rooneys really are.
Right.
And we all know Rocky Bleier's story, so I'm not going to go over it again. But if you ain't never seen the movie, at least watch the movie. But Rocky Bleier is just an inspirational story of a true warrior and a man who brought something to the Steelers that people don't realize how important it was on those Steel Curtain teams. And to a man, everybody respects Rocky Bleier.
Right.
But when you said who was my favorite backup, the name that it comes to everybody is D'Angelo Williams. D'Angelo Williams, shoot, the dude went into wrestling for a while. I mean, he was well-rounded. He's so talented and acting. He could do wrestling. He was a great running back. And it was funny. He was always part of a platoon. He was a platoon in Charlotte with the Panthers. And then he comes to Pittsburgh and he's part of a platoon. But if he had to start, he just gets you 100 yards every game. He was just so talented and is so reliable. And to the point that I think we all took him for granted a little bit. Because, hey, starters out, there's Williams, we're okay. That's so valuable and it's so hard to find. But I think that he don't get the respect that he deserves because he had some tremendous games for the Steelers.
Oh, 100%. And he played a lot of games. And it's crazy because he only played 2 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is also my favorite, backup running back. He is, the Charlie Batch of the running back room, in my opinion. That backup that is good quality, that is dependable, and that's going to get you out of games. And, he started 16 games or 10 games. I'm sorry. He started 10 games in 2015 and 4 games in 2016, but played in the majority of them. He was a good, alleviator of some of the pressure for Le'Veon Bell. But when Bell went down and D'Angelo Williams had to come in, it was, some of these linemen who have been interviewed and talked about it, some have kind of indicated that it was a little bit easier to block for D'Angelo Williams because
Yes.
he was a straight to the point kind of guy, get to the hole and go. And when it came to Le'Veon, sometimes his patience made the offensive line had to work a little bit harder, so to speak.
They had to hold their blocks quite a bit longer. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, Ramon Foster is one guy that he's, been very vocal about that. He loves Le'Veon Bell, but he's talked about how that change to D'Angelo Williams was refreshing, and the offense had to move in a different way. But yeah, D'Angelo Williams is one of my favorite ones. Another one just kind of, off the top of my head probably would be, I always like the change of pace kind of guys, your Amos Zerouay, your Eric Pegrams of the world, those guys that were put in a pinch, so to speak, or a third down and were able to do something. Those weren't guys that you would want to depend on throughout the course of the entire game. But, third down in certain situations I thought were awesome. Now, to kind of move into the opposite direction, out of all of the Steeler running backs that have, that you have seen in play, who is the running back that you were probably the most disappointed with?
No, that's easy. I don't even want to say his name, but Rashard Mendenhall.
I have a feeling you were going there.
Yeah. When Ben was suspended, and I remember, what is the Steelers going to do? They were going to try to lean on the running game. And Mendenhall, they was able to lean on him, and he really done well and helped them through that stretch, 4-game suspension, if I remember right. And I did not realize until after the fumble, and I'll leave it at that. And some of the responses, and now the responses we've heard since then, that he's a little bit of a space cadet. I always say read the room. Yeah. And I don't think that he does a good job of reading the room. I think he had a lot of talent. He wasn't always the brightest guy. He tried to challenge Ray Lewis first time he ever fought him, played him, challenged him before the game, and then tried to run him over. And that was not a broke his scapula and missed the wrist. I mean, that shows he lacks some intelligence. But yeah, easily he was my biggest disappointment.
Yeah. I mean, I see it, off the field stuff, especially, and some of the comments that he's made and some of the things that he's done, whether it was related to Ben or the team or other things. With Rashard Mendenhall, he was correct me if I'm wrong, but a first-round running back who was expected to have done some great things, be that next guy. And even on the field, he had shown some progress, but to me, he was never, he was never that franchise style running back. And I think a lot had to do with, for me, it was the style of running that he did. I just did not like the way he held the ball. It looked like he was holding a loaf of bread out there. It was a fumble waiting to happen, and unfortunately ended up costing the Pittsburgh Steelers number 7. But for me, my most disappointed running back is Bam Morris from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was a guy that was drafted. He was supposed to be bust. He was supposed to be that bigger guy, the bruiser. And, he's a big pivotal role for the Pittsburgh Steelers in getting to Super Bowl 30. And shortly after, off the field issues start happening. Boom. And he can never get back on the field for the Steelers. And it's just, he was somebody that I thought that the Steelers were able to move away from, Barry Foster, that they found a guy. He was a bigger dude. And to me, he's a Texas boy. I'm from Texas. So, highly disappointed in what ended up happening there with Bam Morris. That to me was probably the most disappointed running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion.
Daniel, one thing I'm seeing, one guy that I really, really like getting some love here, and people remembering him, is Chris Fuamatu Malafala.
Yeah.
And I was always so proud that I could say his name, and Minor Cope couldn't. You know, there's a lot of guys that really struggled to say his name. But he was such a fun player because he was such a powerful player. He was kind of like the Steelers version of Arnhead Hayward. And, you know, you get that ball right to goal, man, just give it to Chris.
Yeah.
Big Foo, he get it in there, you know. And I love to listen to guys, even the national announcers butcher his name. And you thought I would just say Foo. You know, it's Chris Foo, you know. But
Yeah.
you got to love Chris. Now I can't say it. I just said it.
Well, my favorite way of somebody saying it was always Chris Berman, when he used to say he's one bad fella.
Yeah, exactly.
I always loved it when they said that. And I'll always remember his game in the playoffs against the Browns. It was some good memories there. And that, you know, come from behind win that was unexpected against Holcomb and the Brownies. It was a good game. He will also be one of my favorites.
Say Chris Fu and Mato Malafala. You gotta a lot of people's mentioned him. I love that.
Yeah.
I wish he was watching and he could just soak in all this love.
He might be. You never know. If you are, hit us up. I'd love to have you on the show. And so, you know, just a couple of more questions about the running back position, and then we'll call it a show. The first one is, how do you think that this position has changed over time? I know value is a big thing. However, in this most recent draft, Bijan Robinson, another running back, was drafted in the top round early on. Do you see that shift starting to come back to the running back being an important piece? There's that aspect. There's also the fact that in free agency, it doesn't really seem like the money is there. So what are your thoughts on the current temperature of the running back position in the NFL, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think with the modern rule changes to protect the quarterback, the amount of money invested in the quarterback and invested in the offensive line, especially like your left tackle position, teams are vested to protect the quarterback, to throw the football, and you can just score more points quicker through the air. And so we realize that running back position is one of the most instinctual positions in the NFL. You could get guys undrafted like Jalen Warren and bring them in, and they can find a hole. They've got vision. They've got the athletic ability. They can find a hole and they can run through it. Because of that, and so many running backs are not first-round picks. Now, this year, as you said, there was Bijan Robertson and Jalen Gibbs went to the Lions, if I remember. So
Correct.
A couple guys are in the first round. That's not normal anymore. So you have to really be somebody that they think is going to be a Pro Bowl level player to even be considered for a first round running back. And also the need has to be there. And there's really, you can find running backs all over every round and even in free agency or undrafted free agents. So I don't see the value going up. They also have a shorter shelf life. A running back at 30 is considered, you know, on the back end, you know, maybe no longer in his prime.
Right.
So you want to get a running back 21, 22 years old and get him maybe that second contract while he's still in his prime. You don't see usually another contract after that. It's different than a lot of the other positions because it's such an instinctual and physically demanding. You know, they take a lot of abuse. They get wore down. We've seen so many of the top running backs, man, they just hit a wall. And you never know when that's going to happen. You know, in Bell's case, he did it to himself by, you know, he left where he was best suited. Mm-hmm. But you have guys like Todd Gurley, an knee injury, you know, because of all the wear and tear. There's been other guys that have went through Ezekiel Elliott.
Right.
Elliott was just going along like, you know, he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. And then towards the end of last season, you've seen him start to lose a step, wasn't as effective, and Tony Pollard passed him up. So it's hard. These guys have shorter windows. So they're trying to figure out some way that these guys get paid different on a different pay scale than, say, other positions, because other positions can stay effective longer, and running backs have that shorter shelf life. So it's a bad combination, and I think it's actually going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in that aspect. I think that, you know, I think we might see more drafting of running backs, given the fact that you have that control of the fifth-year option. You don't have to pay a bag to a running back at an earlier point at that point. So the risk reward there's it's a bit lower on the risk aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see your point as far as, you know, getting that second contract and things like that. I think that there's going to be a coming to reality, so to speak, for a lot of these running backs when it comes time for their second contract. And, you know, I honestly thought that we would be seeing something similar with the receiver position, just because of the fact that so many good rookies are coming out. I always found it odd that if there's somebody that's asking for a lot of money, just go and draft yourself a new one. And so, you know, I thought that room would be heading more in a direction of a downward turn as well, but it hasn't. It's still kind of heading upward. Running back is confusing, but like you mentioned, it's just the durability aspect, the fact that, you know, you have younger players that are faster and stronger coming up. It might actually, like you mentioned, get worse before it gets better. But I think that transition might start, given the fact that it seems like more teams are turning back to the run, given the fact that defenses' approach to the offensive game, that, you know, modern offenses is utilizing smaller, you know, defensive backs, linebackers that are more shifty and capable of pass defense versus run defense. And I think we're seeing more of a move back to the run because of that.
As we talked about a little bit earlier in the show, with the defenses becoming more focused on stopping the passing game, we're seeing teams like the Eagles and the 49ers, the Chiefs a lot last year. Chiefs did not have an explosive offense. They did not have an explosive wide receiver core. What they had was the best quarterback, the most unstoppable combination with Mahomes and Kelsey, and they had a good stable running back, especially the young kid, Isaiah Pacheco or whatever his name was, the 7th round running back. And that's the kind of offense they played. They were very creative, play action, different stuff. But it wasn't the offense they'd won the Super Bowl 3 years earlier with. Right. You know, no Tyreek Hill, no explosive plays hardly. So we're seeing a change. And what are the Steelers doing? The Steelers are building a run-heavy package, play action, create mismatches, not just with the receivers, but with the tight ends, with the H-back, with the running backs. The teams are going to start trying to exploit these pass defenses are getting so good and so sophisticated that now teams are, you know, it's an evolution. NFL offensive coordinators are always evolving and saying, okay, we're gonna counter with this. And as you said, that's what we're seeing. And so that could bode well for the running backs. But the one thing that won't change is their shelf life.
Right.
You know, I think the position is such that it's going to, a lot of these great running backs we're talking about, you know, they didn't play over 10 years like we see so many other positions do. Right. Because they just, towards the end, Bettis was a hobbling, and like I said, having to get injections just to play each week. So, you know, we're going to have to keep that in mind, and everybody's going to have to do what's best for all parties involved.
100%. It's going to be, like you said, it's going to be a bumpy road for the running backs, especially for those that are expecting, you know, second contracts. Maybe perhaps these running backs will do something with the Players Association to get them maybe a little bit more financial security in their rookie contract, so that way, you know, they get the bulk of their money during the time that they would be making it or be worthy of making it, so to speak.
That's when it's got to start. It's got to start for running backs on the rookie deal.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. Whether it's incentive based, whatever. I always, believe that the players who are the best players should make the most money.
Yeah.
And just let's say most valuable to their teams, and a lot of these young running backs are very valuable, but they're doing it. They're making pennies on the dollar compared to the other positions. And by the time they get to where they're established, they have a short shelf life. So yeah, I agree. It has to start at the beginning.
So my last question for you. This is one I haven't asked you yet, so I know you're not prepared for it.
Nah.
Now, you've mentioned 2 running backs tonight. You mentioned your favorite running back being Jerome Bettis and the best running back being Franco Harris. Would you replace Najee Harris today with one of those 2 backs in their prime?
In their prime?
In their prime.
I would replace him with either one of them.
Either one of them. So he would be number 3 amongst those backs for you.
Yeah. I mean, again, I like Najee Harris. It's not a knock against Najee Harris, but you're talking about 2 Hall of Fame running backs who were very unique and special.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they were both better players than Najee will end up being. I'm happy with Najee Harris. I like the kid a lot. And I think we're going to see the real Najee Harris now that the offensive line is in the top half of the league, where they've really increased the talent there, and they're going to use him more efficiently, I believe, give Warren, a lot of these carries and not wear him down to keep Najee fresh, especially for the end of the games when they want to close out games. And so I expect him to be more efficient and more effective. But no, I would replace him with Harris or Bettis in their prime, definitely, yes.
I would agree with you on that. I would also take a Le'Veon Bell over a Najee Harris today. Now, I think that Najee Harris, when it comes to the potential, is there. But that's all that it is right now. We haven't been able to see a healthy Najee Harris behind a decent offensive line.
Yes.
Last season, towards the end of the year, I think we started to get somewhat of a glimpse of that. He became more healthier as the year progressed. The offensive line built up their chemistry, and we got to see a little bit of a glimpse of that. But at the same token, it wasn't the same to what these Hall of Fame running backs were at this point. Does Najee Harris have the opportunity or the ability to do, to change that? I think so. He's has a durability. He's very durable. And so that, aspect of his game is going to give him more opportunity to grow and be a better player. And so I would agree with you on that aspect. I think I would also, including the player that I had mentioned being Le'Veon Bell, just because Le'Veon Bell was proven as well. We knew what he was able to do. Granted, he had an offensive line that I think would make Najee Harris very envious up to this year. I think this year could be different, but
no, Bell was definitely a better player, the superior player in his prime to Harris. But I don't want to put a limitation on what Harris can do now that he has a better offensive line.
100%. Couldn't have said that better myself. So with that being said, do you have any final words or anything before we call it a show?
No, just tune in next week and we're going to do another position. And like I said, we're going to finish up with quarterback in the whole TB and Big Ben. So, but I'm excited about this. It's the dead point of the offseason, but this is something I'm excited about.
100%. Stay tuned. We'll be talking about another position next week. With that being said, we'll see y'all then. Peace out. Wait, Shannon, take us out.
You got it, bro.